Okay, good morning and welcome to our Q&A today. We're covering off secure online payments and fraud protection for the retail and B2C space. I'm Matt Gomez. I'm going to be the host and the host today on the Q&A. I'm the Director of Business Development at Acro Media. And what you can expect today is a pretty open conversation. I've got two great guys with me here today, experts in the field of payments and fraud protection. And we're going to go through some pre-planned questions and then also kind of freeball it a little bit. Prior to us starting, actually, we were all sharing some stories where we've all been the victim of some fraudulent activity, mostly through our own stupidity. So the good thing is we're speaking from an area of expertise on not only solving the problems, but also being got to. So I'll hand over firstly to Eric Hartwell to introduce himself. So Eric, say hi.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. So my name is Eric Hartwell. I'm with Signifyd. We are the world's largest provider of guaranteed fraud protection. We actually do a liability shift. So we shift the liability of fraud from the merchant to Signifyd. Our entire goal is just to make the shopping experience easier for your customers while completely removing any fraudulent activity from your website. So again, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. And and my other panelist today is Matt Vega from BlueSnap.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great speaking with you both. I am the Director of Fraud Strategy and Chargebacks with BlueSnap. We are a all-in-one international payments company. Been in the fraud prevention space for about 15 years, spanning mostly e-commerce and on the merchant side, as well as military intelligence. And then now I'm in the B2B and B2C space with international payments, and I lead the fraud strategy for about 3,000 merchants today.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So I couldn't have had two better panelists, to be honest, on this subject. And as I said at the start, I'm Matt Gomez, Director of Business Development at Acro Media. And Acro, as you may well know, is one of the leading e-commerce consultancy agencies in North America, working on both the development side and the planning and strategy for companies in the e-commerce space. So let's get started. Secure online payment and fraud protection. So I think I'll start with a question to Matt, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So when we talk about payment security, what exactly does that entail?
Well, it really depends on there's multiple levels, right? So it depends on whether you're talking about e-commerce or we can kind of go in a little bit specific, but there's really, when people think of online security or payment security, there's really two areas that they're concerned about. Number one is the safety of their card, right? Whether or not their card is going to be compromised, whether or not someone's going to gain access to it, right? So it could be through like a data breach. It could be through some sort of hack or release of information. It could be from merchants not following PCI compliance, but most of the time it's related to online fraud, right? Or cyber fraud is another way that we call it. And so basically it really falls under this umbrella of someone basically maliciously accessing your information and using your credit card to purchase goods and go to Vegas and have a good time.
Perfect. Almost sounds appealing, right? So what are some of the best practices for how you can kind of secure payments and how they're processed then?
Yeah, so it really at the end of the day, when we first started off in this space, is most merchants would start on this in-house solution where they would basically scramble to try and come up with ways to innovate and come up with ways to kind of build their own in-house solution, because there really wasn't very strong fraud prevention technology in the industry. Now you've got some of the world-class leaders in the industry, such as the other panelist here, and really what you need to have an extremely good, extremely strong fraud prevention technology partner to bring on board. And the reason for it is, you get a lot of benefits from bringing on another partner, and instead of doing it in-house. There is some use cases where you could build it in-house, build some machine learning models and build some of these rule engines. But really when you partner with like Signifyd and some of the big players in the industry, is really you're getting all of this expertise at a fraction fraction of the cost. You're getting this network effect where you have hundreds, if not thousands, of other merchants that are feeding data through these models, which are making them more accurate, right? So if a fraudster hits you, then the chances of them hitting someone else or vice versa is much higher, right? And so you can leverage some of that. Some companies, including, like I said, my fellow panelists here, have something called indemnified models. Indemnification, that's where there's a liability shift. So how nice would it be to plug in your fraud solution and then go to sleep and never have to worry about it again, because they're
Right.
going to eat it. So if you guys get hit with fraud, then the bill gets passed on to them. So that's kind of that's really just the gold standard today. Is you want to have some good some strong machine learning, maybe some rules engines and security features on your side, which we can go into. But the partnership is really key. It's really hard to beat nowadays.
Perfect. I guess really that kind of leads me to Eric. I mean, I'm wondering why anyone wouldn't have Signifyd if there's that indemnity piece in there, frankly. But we can kind of come back to that. I mean, the fraud industry overall, Eric, especially kind of consumer behavior. I mean, we shared a few war stories just before we started. Could you talk a little bit about kind of what the overall industry looks like?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think to start with that, we need to talk a little bit about just the massive shift to online shopping over the past year and a half, 2 years. I think, and Matt alluded to this as well. I think we're in the numbers right now. I think we accelerate to 2025, 2026 numbers of, the amount of people that are shopping online. We saw a massive just shift in new shoppers over the last year as well. And with that came just an opportunity for fraudsters. I think it's not just, as Matt said, it's not just, stolen credit cards anymore. It's account takeovers, it's reseller abuse. It's bots, as technology has increased, I think, bots are easier to make and deploy. So I think there's a lot there that, that merchants have to just be aware of and protect themselves. And not only that, returns abuse. I mean, I think, when you talk about consumer behavior, we always talk about Amazon, you always talk about, each e-commerce company is trying to compete with, next day shipping, 2 days shipping, makes it very difficult for these e-commerce companies. And so I think there's just a lot there that they have to try and compete with and build a great brand. And, these e-commerce companies are very good at building, their products, making their products, marketing their products, building their site, and then having to worry about all these different types of fraud is just, is a unique scenario for all of these merchants. So I think there's a lot there to discuss and unpack, but a good starting point. Over the last year, especially, we've seen just a huge rise in fraudulent activities. So very difficult for these merchants to try and combat all these different types of frauds. So as Matt said, there's several solutions in the marketplace that I think they can take a look at, and we encourage e-commerce companies to look at all of them. I mean, there's no each company is going to be a little bit different. And deciding what's the best path to combat all these different types of fraud, is a good way to look at it.
Yeah, and you'd kind of mentioned with the acceleration due to COVID of e-commerce. I mean, aside from pure volume, has there been any changes that you've seen due to COVID specifically?
Yeah, absolutely, great question. I'm sure Matt can chime in on this as well too. But I mean, I think what I said earlier, the amount of new shoppers. That creates a very unique challenge for these e-commerce companies, because they're used to seeing, a lot of the same shoppers, a lot of the same type of activities. So, and it not only was new shoppers, but it was, you had individuals moving from New York, moving to, the mountains in Colorado. So their billing was different than their shipping, which creates a very unique challenge. There's, as Matt said too, and I'm sure we'll get into a little bit of this, but there's rules and filters and different things that merchants can kind of play with inside their payment gateway, inside their e-com platform. And so if it is a shipping billing mismatch, that creates a unique scenario for these e-commerce companies to try and combat. A couple other big ones for us, the BOPIS shift, the buy online, pick up in store, the curbside. That is such a unique experience as a consumer. I absolutely love it. I mean, I'm a new parent, so being able to have everything shipped to my house is great. But then also, just going and being able to buy online and grab it curbside real quick. I absolutely love that. But that created a unique scenario for merchants to try and defend against fraudsters as well, because, again, we saw a lot of account takeover issues where, individuals would, hack in, buy something, pretend to be the individual curbside. And so how do merchants handle that? How do merchants, come up with a strategy to defend against, those fraudulent BOPIS or curbside activities? Another big one was item not received, with what happened over the last course of the year, and UPS, FedEx, all of these different shipping companies not requiring signatures upon delivery.
Right.
We saw a massive uptick in the item not received chargeback claim. So that's another unique experience. And as Matt said earlier, if you're a merchant seeing a lot of those type of activities, you need to probably outsource and try and come up with a good partner that can help you with, what exactly you're seeing, from a fraud perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I guess then kind of, Matt, like Eric touched on it there, you touched on it earlier, kind of the rules, the filters, the machine learning you can put into place. Like, what are some of the examples of that?
Yeah, so there's, it really depends on who you talk to, but there's, really there's kind of these three gold standards that I would say that people use. So number one is a traditional rules engine. Rules engines are very effective at hard blocking behavior, right? So for example, I could put, hey, if Matt Gomez's credit card passes through and the shipping address is more than 100 miles from the billing address, block the transaction, excuse me. So, rule engines can create very strong filters that will really get rid of a lot of the low sophistication in fraud attacks, even some of the higher sophistication. Rule engines, you can a good fraud analyst can put in some pretty advanced rules that will kind of filter and just think of it as like a sledgehammer, just kind of chipping away at all the really bad fraud that's going through, and the ones that are very clear fraud that with low spoofing technology. Those are really easy ones. The second step up, I would say, is machine learning. And there's different varieties of machine learning. There's supervised and unsupervised machine learning. Machine learning is incredibly good at being able to find abnormalities within the data sets and identify patterns and locate things that a lot of times slip through rules engines. I don't know very many fraud prevention solutions out there that do not use a combination of machine learning as well. Nowadays, it's pretty much the gold standard. There's also at the payment level, right? So there's also payment rules and different types of settings. And Eric had mentioned some of this, like in your payment gateway. So one of those is called AVS, excuse me. So, address verification systems and all of these different services will basically, they're pretty ineffective in general. Most of the time, we don't recommend them. Most of the time, we tell people to shut them off or to use them as a data point for machine learning. Right. So like if we were to partner with Eric, then we would potentially pass that data point on, but we wouldn't use it to decision on. So those are kind of the three main areas that we kind of think of. Of course, there's many, many other layers that you can go into, but at a high level, those are the three big ones.
Got you. Perfect. Thanks, Matt. And Eric, so Matt mentioned there like a fraud analyst, and like Signifyd obviously do that kind of role. What do you typically see in the companies you work with though? Do they usually have a person dedicated to this, or are they just noticing that there's a problem and Googled it and found their way to you?
Yeah, great question. So I mean, prior to my current role, I spent 2 years on our sales team. So my entire role was just talking to merchants, trying to understand what they were going through, what they were dealing with, and then, debating if they wanted to come on board with Signifyd. And typically we would hear of three strategies. Strategy number one being, as Matt said, just kind of uncheck all those filters, all those rules, let as many orders, hit the system as possible. What ends up typically happening then is that, teams end up dealing with chargebacks. And so do you have an individual that fights those? Do you have an individual or do you have a team of individuals that help fight chargebacks? And those can be, incredibly difficult to handle. I think, typically when I spoke to merchants, half the time they only fought, 50, 60% of them because, 40, 50% of them, they just felt were too challenging to even fight. So that was one strategy. Strategy number two is, Matt alluded to, just a high emphasis on manual review. So you'll have those rules, those filters, and then you'll have a certain subset of the orders, maybe there was a dollar amount associated with. So every order higher than $200, for example, would go to our manual review team. And that could be one individual, that could be a team of individuals, depending on the size of the company. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to finance individuals, director of finances at really large growing companies that say, I spend 2 hours a day, 2-3 hours a day looking at orders, trying to understand if these are, good customers or bad customers. So that's can be a pretty big burden on those individuals that are trying to make that decision. And a lot of times they're just looking at Google, they're looking at Facebook, they're looking at LinkedIn, trying to, they're Google mapping the address, trying to understand if that's a good individual or a bad individual that might, take advantage of the brand. So that can be really challenging. And then the third one, just, as Matt said too, a lot of automatic declines, where you'll have a lot of those rules and filters in place where essentially they're treating almost every order the exact same. And so you're, with that though comes, you are declining some good orders occasionally. So there's really three scenarios that we typically would see prior to, someone looking at a company like us or, all the other players that are in this space.
Got you. And sorry if this question seems a little rudimentary or basic there here, but you'd mentioned there where these team members, and often senior team members, are spending time kind of reviewing the order to see if they think it's fraudulent and Googling the people. Has the order gone through at that point and now they're doing that retroactively, or is the order on hold effectively at that point until they approve it?
Typically it's on hold. I think it can be both depending on how you have your settings in the payment gateway and But typically it was on hold, if you will.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because you want that instant gratification as the customer, right? And
exactly, And that ties into kind of that consumer experience as well. So when you, as Matt said, when you're looking to be a gold standard in those e-com companies that are meeting shipping requirements and shipping standards and getting the product out immediately. Certain, when you look at companies like us and others, they can help kind of meet those consumer expectations.
Yeah. And I guess this is for both of you. Is there any kind of signals that the fraudsters can pick up prior to the kind of the checkout flow where they know this is a site I shouldn't be messing with? Is there any kind of standard warning signs that someone in the know who's trying to take advantage would see and instantly be like, you know what, I'll try another site?
Yeah, Eric, do you mind if I take this one?
Yeah, go for it, please.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, there definitely are. So especially in the sophisticated network. So one of the first things that they're going to look for is they're going to look at like your terms and services, right? Terms and conditions, right? Okay. They're going to see, can they find exploits in your policies, right? In your refund policies, and your chargeback policies and how you operate your business. Sometimes they'll do testing. They'll kind of determine to see, what kind of security features do you have? They'll potentially run a transaction and say, okay, let's see if they have 3D secure, and they're going to step up, or they're going to provide some sort of, multi-factor, two-factor authentication. So, they can kind of like almost like penetration testing your system for fraud, right? And there's a variety of techniques. Really sophisticated networks will go far beyond that, and they'll for example, I can go on to LinkedIn and I can pull up Acro Media, I can pull up any of the companies out there. I can have a pretty good idea of who's at the company today based on LinkedIn. I can also determine if they have a fraud team, right? Is there any fraud analyst positions within that company, right? I could also look for potentially, how the structure of the company is. If there is a fraud team, I can look at that person's background and I can say, okay, this person has very little account takeover experience, so I'm going to actually target this company via account takeovers because this guy's probably not going to know what to do. So there's a variety of techniques that they use. And then if you really want to get sophisticated, and these are like when you start getting into the top tier fraud networks, they'll even look for like current job openings. So for example, if you have a fraud manager slot available that you're hiring for and 2 analysts, that means that like, okay, these guys are probably pretty desperate to stop some sort sort of issue that they're having, and they probably also don't have the expertise in-house to stop it, so they're trying to hire it. So I'm just gonna eat them alive, right? And so that's kind of those are just some high-level examples of what they look for. There's a ton of other things that they look for. They look for partnerships, right? They look for, like, for example, if I was a fraudster, if all this company had was 3D Secure, or all this company had was some internal rules, versus, I could find out that, even going on some of the partner sites, right? I could go to Count and have a fairly good idea of some of the big partners that Count has, or Riskified or Signifyd, and a lot of times those are fairly public. And so, it's a lot harder to get through a company when you have a bunch of professionals that are helping protect you than some engineer in the basement that's coming up with some rules engines and thinking it's best in class. So that's kind of at a high level.
That's crazy. Like, it reminds me of, like, our business development teams who are going out and looking at job openings to see who's looking for e-commerce managers. And
absolutely.
So, like, these kind of, you've mentioned a few times now, these fraud networks, like, is from a retail point of view, are retailers more concerned or less concerned or equally concerned of, like, the odd person at home who's got trying to do a nefarious act, but they're kind of operating solo? Or is the much larger problem that there are these networks where they are doing, large scrapes of cards and doing it in a very systematic way?
Yeah, today I kind of put it into three categories, right? So definitely 100% you have the one-offs that you're talking about. Those ones, they don't tend to be as sophisticated. They tend to fall under more of the friendly fraud category. So to give you an example of friendly fraud would be, I purchased a service, or I can say I could purchase a good, and then I'm going, even though I successfully got my orders, or I successfully used the service, I'm going to claim fraud to my bank and say, nope, I didn't approve this. I don't know anything about it. I didn't receive this order, right? With the goal of both keeping the product and my money. So that's friendly fraud. That's by far one of the most difficult to stop for e-commerce merchants out there, right? Because of the fact, if you have, really strong fraud prevention measures, then we can capture a ton of data on the back end to prove that this person wasn't legitimate. But if the person was legitimate, right, then that's a whole different story. So that's one of the big ones that e-commerce merchants face today, especially. Eric had mentioned a few others, but there's really these kind of three categories. You have these highly sophisticated networks, and by the way, the vast majority of the time, merchants do not know that they're getting hit by a sophisticated network. There's also something that we call fraud for hire now. So, for example, so you can go on. There's multiple services. I won't give them plugs for it, but
but you can tell me them after.
Yeah. So there's multiple services out there, and they're very, like, well publicized as well. But basically, I know there's one that I was talking to not recently that basically said, hey, we will even guarantee a refund up to $10,000. So what you're going to do is you're going to place an order on your card, right? We're going to basically capture it, or we're going to basically defraud them, and then we're going to do like a refund scam where we're going to put in, let's say you buy a TV. Well, the TV weighs 116 pounds. We're going to get that cardboard box. We're going to fill it up with a bunch of wood that weighs 116 pounds, and then we're going to send it in, because we know that the SLA, the turnaround time, is going to be like 6 months before they figure it out. So there's all sorts of crazy little, like, loopholes and scams that they look for. The other thing is of course there's huge data breaches. There's billions. I mean, everyone should just assume that their social security and credit cards are already on the deep web. If you think that they're not, then I hate to break to you, but they are. And so, and there's a lot of really easy ways to check to see if that's actually true. But for example, We Sell Your Data. There's a company called We Sell Your Data, and for $10, I can go on there and probably buy your credit cards, your social security number, date of birth, any of your past addresses. So these are e-commerce companies, by the way. These are not deep web companies. You can buy this on the open net. So that's really the three categories, right? You have these professional fraud networks that are using sophisticated sophisticated malware. They're spoofing device ID. They're spoofing device fingerprinting. I've seen even like government-funded fraud. So if you start looking at China and North Korea in particular, North Korea will very, very frequently like fund operations because of the fact that they need incoming money. That's why they're involved in a lot of cyber attacks. Wow. And then of course you have these one-offs, which are a little bit less sophisticated, but they're just as big of a pain and they're very nagging because they're all over the place. Some of them will just use, stolen cards. Some of them are, 18-year-old kids doing something stupid. And then the friendly fraud is really a big piece, or people claiming like they didn't receive the order, right? Because it's very hard to prove. There's some ways around that. There's some tricks that you can put in, but at a high level, that's kind of the big categories.
Well, I'll save you the $10 on pulling my data. I can tell you my credit cards are maxed, and you're always welcome at my home. So I can send you the address for that. So Eric, from your point, then, I mean, with Signifyd and you guys kind of effectively, covering the losses, like, are you guys concerned in the same way as Matt is with regards to, friendly is maybe less, but not but much harder to stop, and then you have these larger sophisticated networks. Like, where do you guys really prioritize, or what are you most worried of?
Yeah, I'd say it's all of it. I think as Matt alluded to, the friendly fraud, those are tougher to fight, and I think that's where our, as Matt said earlier too, our human supervised machine learning comes into place, because I got a couple stories I can maybe share here that, about friendly fraud recently that happened to us, where individuals, they look like good purchases. One was actually $12,000 worth of Kobe Bryant signed memorabilia. And this individual claimed back to the company that, I didn't order this. I'm not a basketball fan. I don't even, not a Kobe Bryant fan. And so, our chargeback investigation team went to work. If you found out that this individual was a huge Kobe Bryant fan, actually used to work indirectly for, one of the NBA owners. And, we ended up winning that for our client. But, to your question, it's all of it, but, it's those, hopefully our machine learning algorithm can catch those bot attacks, those carding attacks, at a really fast pace. Those friendly fraud ones, those become a little bit more intense. And that's where, hopefully our chargeback investigation teams and, not just us, but those other companies out there that, those individuals can, help these e-commerce companies recoup some of these losses, because those can be the really difficult ones to fight.
Yeah. Okay, so I personally love these kind of examples. I wonder if you have a couple more, like if you have another, Eric, if Matt has one.
You know what? I got an interesting one that that Matt actually alluded to. So Samsung, big client of ours, we can use their name. Again, they're on our website. So if fraudsters are doing research, they know that. We're probably protecting them, but there was a 85-inch TV. This actually just happened a week and a half ago. It was an 85-inch TV. Thing was worth about $11,000. Individual did the returns abuse. He got it. I think he returned the box with a bunch of stuff inside of it. And our chargeback investigation team went to work. Did the work on behalf of the company and found out that this individual had, and that's where the data of machine learning comes into play, because we know certain things when, because these people aren't doing it to just one site. They're doing it to multiple sites. So they could be, across several verticals, right? It could be doing it with shoes and jewelry and TVs. So that was a pretty cool one that happened to us. And kudos to to the chargeback team on that one. So we found out that,
I'm smiling very widely here, because that's actually I love hearing that's now a scam online, because that's an old scam that used to happen in England when I was growing up, and it would be some travelers would come into town and they would have typically TV boxes, and they would show you the TV, and when you would turn around to get your money, the boxes would be swapped out with one that was full of something weighted and sealed. And by the time you got home, you were screwed. So that's crazy.
It's just, and COVID has accelerated all of this, because it's just made everything so difficult. Returns abuse has been such a big issue for merchants, for forever, but now specifically too. And talk about furniture and these other things. It's more expensive for these companies to take these items back, and fraudsters know this now, as Matt said. So if you have data, if you're working with a company that has the amount of data that knows that these individuals are doing this to other companies, and we can hopefully help and protect your business a little bit further.
Cool. I got a couple more questions, but Matt, did you have an example lined up? I'll just check because that's
Yeah. I mean, we see stuff all the time, but you know, I'll give you kind of an interesting one that will give you a level of sophistication of kind of where things are going in the industry and why it's so important to partner with, you know, kind of these leading technology partners. Is that just recently we saw an attack where basically these fraudsters were using malware to capture legitimate device ID and fingerprint. So a device, think about a device fingerprint as it's what we have. It's one of the best indicators of what the device is, who owns the device. It's like your own fingerprint, right? So like we are very confident in device fingerprints in general. So these fraudsters were able to spoof device fingerprints and spoof some of the phone numbers, spoof some of the data, and it was able to make it through a lot of the sophisticated machine learning models and rules engines, because of the fact that the malware has become so sophisticated that basically I can make myself digitally look like Matt Gomez and basically start taking over your accounts. I could potentially do password resets on your accounts and get in. If I get access to your email, then it's all over, right? Then I'm going to do password resets on all of your accounts. They're going to send an email to your, send an email to your email. I'm going to capture that email. I'm going to, do the reset, and then I'm going to delete the email before you even see it. So we started seeing an attack in that, and the only way that we were able to stop them is they were able to spoof everything except for their altitude. So what we had to do is we were capturing device altitude at the time. And so, for example, if this guy was saying, "Hey, I'm currently located in my my IP address says my GPS triangulation is telling us that they're in Denver, Colorado," but when we look at the altitude, it says 18 feet above sea level, right? Denver, Colorado is the mile high city, right? We know that something's off. So like that's how sophisticated sometimes you have to go in order to stop the sophisticated networks.
Wow.
Yeah,
I know this isn't something I should be digging, but I'm so into this. That's crazy. Wow. Okay. Yeah, great example. Thanks.
Yeah.
So Eric, one thing that you'd mentioned on your example was like some furniture companies, for example, where where it's just not worth them kind of taking it back, and fraudsters know that. Is there some specific verticals in B2C retail that are more prone, and if they don't have a solution right now, they should probably be looking for one?
Absolutely. I mean, home goods is probably one of the top verticals that we saw growth over the last year. It's, with everyone being at home, everyone, doing upgrades to their car, to their house, to their backyard. I mean, I can't tell you how much new furniture I bought for our backyard because we have a new house. But I'd say that's one of the top verticals that, where we see a big problem. And just the outdoor goods, the home goods, it's a very difficult business for people to be in because of the returns abuse that has been happening over the past year. So I'd say that's for sure one.
Awesome. And then, so kind of just to kind of wrap up a little here. So if I'm a B2C retailer, I have my e-com platform right now. I'm seeing some indications that I'm getting, some activity, or I'm concerned about it. What should I be looking at? What sort of stack am I looking at? Am I looking at a particular payment processor, payment gateway? Am I looking at a product like Signifyd? What should it be? What should I be looking for?
Yeah, I'm happy to take a stab at it, Eric. So basically, my answer is all of the above, really. So think of it. One of the payments is a huge and absolutely mission critical area that is commonly overlooked. And our CEO Ralph Dengelmeyer actually just spoke about this, in a podcast, and that is the fact that a lot of companies out there, merchants out there, they have a product roadmap, and they have this plan, and they understand their growth opportunities and how they're going to target them. So I can't tell you how many times I've also come in as a consultant, which I've done many times, where there's always this question of build versus buy, right? And so should we build an in-house solution? That's basically because it's going to be cheaper if we build an in-house solution, right? That's the pitch. Or should we bring in some subject matter experts, or companies that really know what they're doing, like the big players out there, right? There's 4 or 5 5, including Eric, that are really kind of the gold standard in the industry. It's, I will argue this to the death, but basically, unless you're Google and you have billions of data points, it's usually not going to play out very well, right? Usually what ends up happening is they're like, we're going to just throw in a machine learning model, we're going to flip it on, and life's good. And then it ends up taking a year of testing, and the capture rate's low, the false positives are high. You just end up getting this mess, and then you're paying a crazy amount of money for the data science team that's building the models, and it ends up. And really, the other thing is this network effect that I've talked about before is really where you get a ton of value that people forget about, right? If all of these merchants are using, for example, we can talk about Signifyd. If there's hundreds of merchants in big data, especially merchants that are in my space, if I'm Expedia, right, it would behoove me to use fraud prevention partners that potentially are also leveraging, companies that are leveraging a fraud prevention partner that are within my space, like travel technology space, right? Because the fraudsters that are going to target my competition are probably going to target me as well, right? And so if their models are constantly seeing these behaviors come in, and their models are constantly, and their analysts, just like Eric had mentioned, if their chargeback analysts are seeing these new exploits and behaviors come in real time, they're able to identify and stop or prevent or mitigate these far more effectively. And so there's a bigger upfront cost or per transaction cost in some case. Usually it's a percentage with an indemnified model. But if you look over the course of a period of time, it pays for itself exponentially. So that's really kind of my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, that was great. And I just piggyback and just, if I'm talking to e-commerce companies, I just always tell them, focused on customer experience. Look at all the things that are out there that, that can help your website deliver the performance you want, and, can help your customers buy as easy as possible. Matt crushed it, so there's not a lot I want to add on to that. But I'd say, just focus on customer experience, and it's So I think there's a lot of technologies out there, that can help you succeed, and just make sure there's ones that are helping your site perform at the absolute best, and giving the best consumer experience for us when we're shopping on your site.
Absolutely. And I think, the biggest point there is just that shared experience. By you guys specializing in this, you're seeing everything across all the verticals, and it's that shortcut, right? As opposed to seeing it one time for yourself and not knowing what to do with it. Awesome. So if people wanted to get in touch with you guys independently, what would be the best way to do that? Matt, maybe is it your LinkedIn?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So LinkedIn's always great. So feel free to reach out to me directly. I believe it's vega.intel. So LinkedIn, and then I think it's /in/vega.intel. So that would be a great way. Another thing is, you feel free to email me at any time. It's matthewv@bluesnap.com. That's always a great way. Happy to have conversations, discuss if anyone has any fraud related questions. Also, I have a podcast, so if you want to learn a little bit about the fraud prevention space, it's the Fraud Technology Podcast. We bring CEOs, executives on to talk about our space. So any of those avenues is great.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And you, Eric?
Sure.
Yeah, same thing. LinkedIn, Eric Hartwell on LinkedIn. Go to Signifyd's website, signifyd.com. Otherwise, talk to our friends at Acro Media. Hopefully they'll get us in touch together. So
absolutely. Well, guys, you've been great. I personally really enjoyed this. So if one person at least got a ton of value out of this, and I'll be in touch after this as well to continue those conversations. And to everyone who's watching at home, hope you found some value. Hope you found it helpful. Again, myself, Matt Gomez. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on all the things. Matt's probably looked me up and bought my profile already, in fact. So, so you can hit him up if you need to get hold of me.
We sell your data.com already got you. Don't worry about it.
Perfect. All right. Well, everyone have a good day. And thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Cheers.